Minimalists.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are the Minimalists.
Welcome to today's episode. Today we're going to talk about feeling stuck creatively, feeling stuck emotionally, and what it takes to get unstuck. And we're going to answer your questions with today's guest. Rosi Golan is here today, one of my favorite musicians.
Thank you.
And we're really grateful to have you today. Yeah. Your newest collection of songs is called Collecting Bullets.
Yep.
So folks can definitely check that out. We'll be talking about some music today. The reason I wanted to call this one Unstuck or Feeling Unstuck is I read an interview you were doing between albums when you were recording Collecting Bullets, and that phrase actually came out. You said, I was feeling stuck. And so we have some questions. The way this podcast typically works is we don't interview people per se. We have some conversations that tend to be based around questions that our audience has, but really we just inject ourselves into the whole experience. So I'm hoping to talk to you about that creative process and what got you unstuck and what you had to go through in order to get unstuck. Our first question today is from Sam in Cleveland, Ohio.
Since I graduated from college, I've been working in college admissions. I've been a tour guide, and I loved working with students, and so that was always something that I truly loved doing, and I did find purpose in when I was a student, and that kind of kept me going through college, even though college wasn't quite my thing. Now that I've graduated, I've now worked for 4 years in college admissions, and sometimes I feel like that gives me a true purpose, but then there's other times that I feel like it's not. How do you keep going when not every single day feels like you're working towards your true calling or purpose? How do you move forward? Or maybe should I start looking for something else?
So this is fascinating, Rosie. I'm sure once you became a musician, all the drudgery was gone, and every day you felt fully fulfilled.
Like you rode here on a unicorn, like on a rainbow road to the studio, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
Are there days where you feel like is this what I'm supposed to be doing?
There's years when I feel that way. You know what? Somebody once gave me some really good advice when it came to relationships, and I kind of also use it with music, which is no one person can be everything to you. So like if you are, in a relationship, that person can't be your best friend and your lover and your confidant and the person that you go to for every single thing. There are things that you're not going to want to talk to them about, or that you're not going to be able to laugh with them about. You're not always going to share in every single thing. I mean, you can get as close to that as possible, but the truth is, like, there are things that I can get from my girlfriends that I can't get from a partner, that I can get from my mom that I can't get from my girlfriends, and so forth. And I think it's the same with what I do for a living. There are like literally months on end where I'm just like, what am I even doing? And the longer I've been doing it, the more I realize that in order for me to like really appreciate what I do, and like also to like stay re-energized in doing what I do, is to also do other things.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like to just realize. And also because these days, I don't think most people are probably going to do the one thing that they're doing for the rest of their lives. No. I think that it's cyclical now. I think that you can have more than one career in a lifetime.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we're seeing the data bear out now where, we have people who are younger than us are going to go through more careers than our parents went through job titles.
Right.
So our parents may have had the opportunity to work at a factory for 30 years or whatever. Not your parents, apparently, because before the podcast, you were telling us that your father was an actual gypsy.
Yeah. Career was not really his thing.
Right. And I think if we're focused on career, we might be focused on the wrong thing. But I also think, conversely, if we're just focused on passion, we might be focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Ryan and I often talk about cultivating a passion, and I think maybe the thing that is missing here for Sam, or the thing that was missing for me and Ryan in our corporate lives of yesteryear, was we forsook creativity. And I think the opposite can also be true. I know a lot of creative folks who forsake getting the creation out into the world because it seems disingenuous, or like, I don't want to seem markety or whatever. Like, I get it, but it's what you're talking about with the relationships. There's a balance there.
Yeah.
And I think there's a balance with anything. I think with Sam's career, what she's doing right now for her job, I guess the question I would ask her is, what can you do outside that job if you could do anything?
Yeah.
And I think some of us, we tend to go toward without knowing it, we pacify ourselves. Like, well, I'll just hop on YouTube for a few hours, or I'm just going to turn on some TV, or I'm going to waste some time effectively. And that's not what I mean. Like, what would you do if you could do anything? But if you had the opportunity, what would you really do? What would you do that serves the greater good? And I think, Rosi, you found that in music. What you've done with music has served the greater good. You've created something beautiful, several beautiful bodies of work.
Thank you.
But in doing that, I imagine there was a lot of heartache in the process of doing it.
Well, I mean, I think in general, one thing that songwriters often do, and I try not to, is you kind of self-destruct a lot of times to create, which is a terrible habit. But it's one I've grown out of, because you have to you have to find inspiration within other places.
Yeah. It's funny. I was listening to your one of your songs earlier today. Don't You Dare. And I don't know what that song is exactly about, but one of the lines is, every once in a while I do something that stirs me up.
Yeah.
And I think that's like kind of hits the nail on the head with what you're trying to say with creativity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing for Sam too is she needs to reframe kind of how she's approaching her career, approaching her life. Like, yeah, she talks about the true purpose or that true passion or the true calling. And the good news is like, Sam, there's not just one true calling for you out there. There are many, many different callings. I know for me, I used to think that if I found that one true calling, then I'd ride to work on a rainbow road, riding a unicorn. I'd wake up every single day happy.
Yeah.
The problem with that expectation is that that's mania. That's manic. If you're waking up every single day super excited, you're a manic person. And a manic person at its terminus is
they're naked directing traffic.
Yeah, exactly, in the middle of the street. So instead of focusing on that true calling, instead of focusing on that true purpose, I would encourage Sam to focus on living a meaningful life. And living a meaningful life is when our short-term actions align with our long-term values and our beliefs. And when you do that, the beautiful byproduct of living a meaningful life is happiness. But expecting that one true calling to wake up every single day and say, oh man, like I can't wait to go and enroll students into college. I mean, that's never going to happen. Even with Josh and I mean, we still got to pay taxes. We got to go on tours, or a lot of drudgery that we have to work through.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the one thing that keeps me going though is knowing that what I do, it's at least helping a few people out. And that's really what I focus on. I don't really focus on like, okay, how many millions of people can I help, or how many likes can this post get? But it's like, if I can do something that's going to do something for my community, or somewhere across the world, like that's what really keeps me going. And I think Sam is doing that right now. She does have a job where she is adding a little bit of value to the community. And I'm not saying that, well, Sam, just focus on adding value to the community, and that's going to be the answer to your question here. But that will help her at least feel good about what she's doing for her job. It's like, I think about I saw this. It was like a meme of this gentleman quoted. He was from Nigeria or something, refugee, and he got a job at a call center. And he was talking about how much he loved his job. He's like, man, I get to talk to people in the community. I get to help people with their problems. And just coming at it from that aspect, he could feel good about the work he was doing. Instead of, I know when I was in management in retail, it was like, what am I doing? I'm just like sitting here, taking phone calls, selling cell phones. It was very easy for me to get down. But, now I look back, I could have reframed that a little bit differently. Although the vast majority of that job did not align with my values and beliefs.
Right.
That's where we get into the problem.
And what's funny about the you said he was Nigerian who worked at a call center?
Yeah.
Him going in that job, it's amazing how two autonomous human beings can go into the same situation and say, man, I absolutely love this. And the person right next to them who's doing the same tasks are saying, I absolutely hate this. And part of it has to do with like, well, what's appropriate for you? But I think really a lot of it has to do with reframing your perspective.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone through recording something and you're like, you started to hate the process because it wasn't going well?
That's
a type of feeling stuck.
I think recording, no, but writing, yes. I definitely have actually, that's not true. I probably went through like a year of writing and recording an EP and scrapping it. And it's the only time that I've ever done that I've ever spent my time and effort and energy writing something, recording it, and then never releasing it. And that it felt like such a failure. But I think it's the same thing, like looking back, if I had, first of all, been like less precious about it, because I knew that, putting new music out would actually be really great and like moving things forward, and people were waiting for new music. And also if I had reframed it in the sense of like, okay, but like that was true in that moment. And like, because that's the thing with music, like what's true in that moment isn't going to be true in this moment. So like what I'm writing, it works for that part of my life. And that's what music really is. Like for myself as a singer-songwriter, like those are snapshots of like those moments in my life. So for instance, my first record, I'm so far away from that, even though that's the record that so many people often go back to. I can never recreate that because I was in a completely different phase of my life.
And if you tried to recreate it now, it would feel disingenuous.
Yes, absolutely.
You'd be referencing a person that was no longer you. You're like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess we looked fairly similar.
Yeah.
But I have the compound interest of years of wisdom that I've gained since then.
I don't even hear myself in that. It's crazy. Like I can hear the experiences, but if I listen back to it, I sound so different to myself, which is really weird.
But what's fascinating is those songs, even today, if someone goes back and listens to your first album, a lot of people can relate to that because that's what they're going through currently, right? And so you have that sort of time capsule of your life, but it's also it's a time capsule by proxy for other people's lives, and I'm sure you get messages all the time where people are like, that really helped me get through X, whatever X is. Sam, I want to send you a copy of our book, Everything That Remains. Speaking of, this is a book that I wrote when I was 32 with Ryan, and I couldn't go back and write that, 6 years later and say and
be completely different.
It would be a totally different book, for better or for worse. It's my favorite thing that we've ever done, but it's also it was like people often ask, how long did it take to write that book? I'm like, it took 32 years, right?
Yep.
The first album's the same way, right?
It
takes 22 or 25 years or whatever the process is to get there, because it's the lived experience of childhood and everything up to that.
Yeah.
And so Sam, I'm going to send you a copy of that. If you like our podcast, you'll like the audiobook version of the book. But Ryan and I, in there, we also talk about sort of walking away from the corporate world, not for the sake of just walking away from the corporate world, but because our priorities, we didn't even know what our priorities were. And that was a bit of a problem for us. And once we reprioritized our lives, we realized like, oh, this doesn't align with my values. And so I was able to figure that out and start not just walking away from the corporate world, but walking towards something that was more meaningful for us. Let's move on to the lightning round, Ryan.
All right. Our first question is from Marianne. To become unstuck, I need a good plan. I'd love some ideas on how to map out a plan. I have totally been there, Marianne. All aspects from where to start to how to document.
Now, Rosie, what we do here is, so we try to answer these questions in short, shareable, less than 140 character responses. We call them minimal maxims. But what we really do is we just maunder on a lot, and we discuss it until we come up with something that's pithy enough for Jessica to share. She also puts all of these in the show notes and over at minimalmaxims.com. We are at The Minimalists on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram if you have a question for us. Rosie, you're at Rosi Golan on Twitter and Instagram?
Yes.
All right. You can find her there. All right. So Marianne wants to know about having a plan, Ryan. My first thing...
That's the thing that's the most important part to becoming unstuck is you got to have a plan to get unstuck.
See, I disagree.
Okay.
And I think... Here's my pithy answer, and we'll just unpack it here. You don't get unstuck with more planning. You get unstuck with less friction. And I think my aside there is I think a plan is useful once you are unstuck. But I think sometimes we stay stuck somewhere because we're not willing to take any actual action. We just want to plan more around it. A recording process or writing process. For me, writing is like, well, I'll just keep writing and writing and writing. If I continue to write, then I won't ever have to publish this thing. I don't know if you've gone through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes planning makes you feel like you've already done the thing. That's
that's definitely a danger.
Yeah. So I think like with getting stuck, for me, probably planning would be the opposite, and just literally being like, okay, I'm just going to do this thing is probably the thing that's always made me unstuck. Like, you know, feeling super burnt out on New York and just being like, okay, I'm packing my bags, I'm going to Paris, without like sitting down and being like, okay, so I'm gonna save up this much, or I'm gonna wait this long, or this is what I'm gonna do, and these are the areas I'm gonna research. I didn't do any of that, you know.
You made a decision, though.
I made a decision.
And I think if I were to encapsulate that in a pithy answer for Rosie is, decision is the antidote to stuckness.
It really is.
Because you had to make a decision. And you know what? Even if it's not the perfect decision, maybe it's even the wrong decision, at least that got you unstuck. But then, of course, having a plan once you are unstuck, I think is important. And the thing that I brought up here about friction is, to get unstuck, sometimes you have to remove some of the friction. There might be obstacles in your way that are making you feel stuck. For you, it might have been New York.
That's so interesting, man, because we always talk about how adding friction to our lives is necessary sometimes. But in this case, you're saying
too much friction is bad. And it's like it's driving on a road, right? Where if you have too much friction, it's just boulder after boulder, and the gravel's too heavy. You're doing off-roading without a vehicle that is an off-road vehicle. Yeah. It's too much friction. You can't traverse that landscape. Conversely, if it's all ice, then you're going to slide all over the place. You don't have enough friction. I think you want to find what's the appropriate amount of friction. And I think the creative process often allows us to sort of inject some good friction into our life.
So it's interesting because I took this question as not being stuck in the creative process, but being stuck in life. And when I look at, my days of yesteryear, if I didn't have a plan, there's no way I would have been able to leave my corporate job. There's no way I would have been able to be on this journey with you with the Minimalists. I mean, when I found myself stuck, well, here, let me give you my short answer and then I'll unpack it a little bit. So in order to have a good plan, you must be clear on three things: your outcome, why you want that outcome, and the massive action steps needed to reach your desired outcome. So when I was working in the corporate world, I knew that I didn't want to work there anymore, but I couldn't just get up and quit.
Right.
I mean, if anyone tells you to just quit and start a blog, head for the hills.
Yeah.
That is the worst advice ever.
Right.
So for me to go from having copious amounts of debt, working 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week in a job that I hated, to breaking away from that, the life that I had built the last decade, to do that, it took a huge plan for me.
Sure.
So for me, it was, I wanted to leave my job. That was my outcome. And then getting the reasons why, like, I want to create more. I want to be able to reclaim my time. I want to be able to get out of debt. Having those reasons why is what really gave me the leverage to take these massive action steps.
Well,
so those steps, go ahead.
I was saying maybe the level of planning required is congruent to the size of the step you're trying to take.
I think we can definitely get lost in the details. And yes, if you're planning a trip to Paris, and trying to plan every little, I mean, I'm going to Scotland in July, and trying to plan, our 2 weeks there is, I get overwhelmed. Yeah. And eventually I have a really good friend, Josh Wagner, and he's like, hey man, I'll take care of the planning. I'm like, oh, thank you so much.
That's amazing.
Yeah, right?
I need a friend like that.
Yeah, we just show up and he's like, this is what you owe me for the Airbnb. This is what you owe me for the ferry ticket. So yes, I totally agree that we can get caught in the details of planning. I think that once we have a basic plan though, so going back to when I was in my corporate job, the plan was to get out of debt. What is step number one to getting out of debt? Well, I've got to stop spending more money than what I make. Not only that, but I have to start to cut back on, certain luxuries or non-essentials. Conveniences. Yeah, I had to cut back to start paying down as much debt as I could. So yes, I think that I probably was stuck for 5 years thinking that, oh, well, here's where I am. Here's where I need to be, and there's way too many steps in between. But coming up with just a few reasonable, massive action steps. And when I say massive action, it's like picking up and moving to Paris. Yeah. It's not just talking about moving to Paris. Right. It's about, going to the gym and working out. It's not about just Googling gyms near me, and then you call them and you sign up like, I've signed up for the gym. I'm there. Like, you have to actually go to the gym. So yeah, there is just like with the friction, there's a balance between no friction, and too much friction.
Exactly.
And there's a balance between too much planning and no planning at all.
Indeed.
All right, our next question is from Nui. How do you resolve creativity blocks?
Well, this is a fascinating one, and I don't know if you experience this, Rosie, with writer's block, or I don't know if there's singer-songwriter block or whatever.
Oh, there definitely is.
I don't believe in it. I don't think it exists.
Okay.
And here's why. There are times where, of course, it's more difficult and things aren't flowing, and like there's a flow state where everything's just going right, and you're like, no matter what I write down, it's gold coming off my feather quill. It feels great. There are those times, but I think it requires the actual drudgery, those times where we consider it to be writer's block. And so my short answer is writer's block is shorthand for this is not a priority. I think for a lot of us, we're like, writing's hard. But so is being a bricklayer. And bricklayers don't get bricklayer's block, ever, right? But they're both creating something meaningful. One person's creating a structure. The other person's creating something that is more based in creativity, like a book or a song. But I think, yes, it exists, meaning the drudgery exists, or the times where you just want to put your head through a wall and say, should I even be doing this? But what are some times you've gone through where you were just stuck with creativity block?
Well, I think for me, the thing that I always try to remind myself was, again, a thing that I've just like learned over the years of writing, which is that even if you write the shittiest song today, it took that song to get to the next one.
Amen. Yeah.
So that's the thing. It's like, I never ever say, okay, I have writer's block, so I'm just going to stop writing. You just have to keep doing it anyway.
Yes.
And even if it sucks, even if you like write the worst song, you just have to keep doing it. So I think it's true in that sense. Like, it's not like I'm not going to go to work just because like I'm having a bad day. Like you still got to do it anyway.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that I was just going to say, so like that's kind of how I move through it. I don't just like stop.
You don't try to get around it. You go through it as opposed to trying to get around it. And that's the thing is going through it. Like, you can't experience the sort of the peak of the mountaintop without traversing the valley, right? And you're going to have, every creative process has a valley. And I think especially at first, there's this weird dichotomy because most of what you do is bad when you first start doing a thing. When you first start writing songs or start writing books, the thing that you do, you're not that good at yet. You haven't developed the skill. But then as you develop the skill, you want to be able to get that out there in the world, but you know that it's not that good. And so 80% of the time you want to put your head through a wall, but over time that attenuates and it's 70% of the time. And eventually it's like half the time. Even now, half the time I'm a pretty good writer. I still want to put my head through a wall. The other half of the time it is glorious. And that's where the payoff is. The real payoff is after the sort of drudgery.
Yeah. It's funny. I just thought of a pithy answer, just kind of tying in the planning question before this. So when it comes to creativity, planning is not creativity. Creativity is creativity. And that's really where I think we do get stuck in the creativity process. It's like we outline, we research, but we actually don't get to the creativity.
One thing I tell my writing students is research is not writing.
Right, exactly. So the other pithy answer I got here is limitations breed creativity. So I know for me, it's like we're working on a book right now, and we have these timelines. They're kind of rough, but Josh, Sean, and I, we've been meeting for like the last 3 weeks, the last month on Mondays, and we talk about what we need to do to get this book moving. And I have a week to do certain things, and like I got to get them done. So I get them done. We've known about the book for months, haven't got really anything done, but having this limitation that I've imposed on myself, or that we've imposed on it, it really forces me to sit in the chair and be creative. Who is it? Is it Hemingway? He was like,
I think it was Fitzgerald. I think I attribute this quote to podcast Sean now because so many people have said this, but like I write only when I'm inspired, but I make sure I'm inspired every morning at 8:30 a.m.
Right.
and I think that's true. You have to put yourself in the chair. The best 4 words I've ever been taught about writing is sit in the chair, and you have to do that regularly.
Sit in the chair and get creative. Like, I think that's the thing. It's like, oh, well, how do I fix this? Get creative with it.
Yeah, and sometimes those limitations, they force you to be more creative, because if you have abundant, unlimited resources, that's a different kind of stuck.
Yeah.
It's an infinite landscape. It's the paradox of choice, and we also don't want to be there. So add some limitations to breed that creativity. Looks like we have several more surprise questions this week about shame, about advice for feeling stuck in your career, about leaving your job to experience the world. Rosie, you've experienced the world more than just about anyone I know, so we can definitely talk about that. And I want to talk to Rosie about taking time to sort of breathe between creative projects, which I know that you've done. And also, you bought a house recently in Nashville. And I want to talk about, before the podcast, we were talking about the stress of filling the space. So you're welcome to ask us some questions as well. Ryan and I have about 12 answers. I can't promise they're the right answers, but we do have some answers for you. And if you want to hear all that, you can listen to this week's Maximal episode, available exclusively on Patreon. That's right. You're currently listening to our weekly Minimal episode, but each week Ryan and I record an entirely different long-form Maximal episode on the Minimalists private podcast, which gives us the private space we need to talk about topics we don't typically talk about in public. Plus, Patreon is the best way for us to fund this podcast and keep it 100% advertisement free. When you subscribe to the Minimalist private podcast on Patreon, you'll receive a personal link so that our Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also get access to our entire back catalog of more than 100 private podcast episodes. Find all the details and all the good stuff, including an additional podcast episode every week, over at theminimalists.com/support. Ryan, what else you got for us this week?
As always, I just want to encourage people to read more and get informed. And now, here are some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners.
This is Julie from southern Minnesota. I recently heard about a survey done in Canada and the U.S. on the John Tesh radio show, saying that we spend more hours a week on the toilet than we do exercising. So kudos to you, Josh and Ryan, for, again, opening my eyes to possibilities on how to squeeze in some exercise and having that gentleman on your show. I learned a lot today. Thank you. And like I said, I just wanted to share that. We spend more time on the toilet, which was on average 3 hours a week, than we do exercising. How sad is that?
Hi, Josh and Ryan. I'm Dee from Meridian, Idaho. And with Mother's Day quickly approaching, I wanted to share a meaningful gift-giving idea. When my children were young and didn't have much money, I'd answer their, "Mom, what do you want for Mother's Day?" question with a poem, a song, or a prayer. I love receiving these creative efforts. My children are now 21, 20, and 16, and I still receive some variation of this standing gift request. And to keep it clutter-free, but just as meaningful, I scan their creations into my computer and throw away the paper copies and CDs.
All right, y'all, that's almost it for this episode. Thanks again to Rosi Golan for joining us today. Make sure you check out her latest project. It's called Collecting Bullets. And real quick, for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the Minimalists. I teach an online writing class. So if you want to learn how to write better, you can head on over to howtowritebetter.org. I've been teaching this class now for, what has it been, Ryan? Maybe
since 2011 for sure.
Yeah, so
going on 8 years,
almost
man.
8 years. And what I've learned is that the rising tide lifts all boats with respect to writing. I first started teaching this to people who wanted to write blogs, but then people wanted to write books. And I had written several books. They're like, your books really resonate with me. Other people wanted to improve their emails. Mm-hmm. So like we're improving business emails, which was odd to me when I had the first few people show up. I'm like, oh, okay, I can help you out with that. When I realized like improving your writing, learning how to write better, improves your writing across all platforms, including text messages. So if you want to learn to write your first book
or your best text messages,
Ryan Nicodemus, the author of the best-selling text message. It's howtowritebetter.org. It's an online writing class. You can check it out. If you have a question, comment, or minimalism tip for our podcast, leave us a voicemail, 406-219-7839, or send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. You can comment on this episode at youtube.com/theminimalists. And if you want our show notes in your inbox, sign up for our email list at theminimalists.com. You'll also receive our Simple Sunday emails each week. For our added value this week, I'm going to play you out with my favorite Rosi Golan song. It's called Think of Me from her first album. It's called The Drifter and the Gypsy. And if you leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.